Thanks for tuning in to Crazy Manga Stories. Give a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for more betrayal stories. Ethan sat in the quiet stillness of his study, the faint hum of his desktop computer blending with the rustle of leaves outside. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before he opened Melissa's email account. He hated himself for it, hated the invasion of privacy, but the nagging doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. Over the past few months, their once vibrant marriage had felt increasingly hollow, their conversations tinged with a new distance. Ethan's analytical mind wouldn't let it rest. It started with the late-night texts, the sudden work dinners, and the guarded smiles when her phone buzzed. On a whim, he hired a private investigator 2 weeks ago, a decision that felt like the ultimate betrayal of trust. But if Melissa was lying to him, hadn't she betrayed him first? The report arrived in his inbox that afternoon. As Ethan opened the attachment, his stomach tightened with dread. Photographs of Melissa in intimate proximity with another man filled the screen. Ethan recognized Jacob instantly. Her ex-boyfriend. The man who had never quite left her orbit. Ethan's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of their interactions over the past year. The impromptu business trips, the slight but noticeable change in her wardrobe, the perfume she only wore on Fridays. It all clicked into place, and the weight of realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Melissa wasn't home when he finally emerged from his study. Her note on the kitchen counter was brief. Dinner with Jacob and his team. Work stuff. Don't wait up. Ethan stared at the handwriting, so familiar yet now alien, as if the words had been written by a stranger. His phone buzzed. It was Claire, his sister, always attuned to his moods. "Hey, E," she greeted. "How's life in the suburbs?" "Falling apart," Ethan said flatly. He recounted what he'd discovered, his voice steady but stripped of emotion. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Claire spoke, her tone as sharp as the edge of a blade. "You don't deserve this. If she's been lying to you, it's time to call her out. But Ethan, don't lose yourself in the process." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. Instead, he drafted a plan, meticulously outlining each step of how he would confront Melissa. He wasn't impulsive by nature, and this would be no exception. The confrontation needed to be calm, controlled, and devastatingly precise. His ultimate goal wasn't vengeance, it was vindication. He wanted Melissa to see the full weight of what she had done, to strip away her carefully curated facade. If there was any shred of truth left in their relationship, it would emerge in the harsh light of honesty. By dawn, Ethan was resolved. He would confront her tomorrow, in the sanctuary of their own home, and lay it all bare. But tonight, he would prepare. His calm demeanor concealed a storm of emotions beneath the surface. A maelstrom of heartbreak, anger, and betrayal. Ethan stood in the kitchen, his hand gripping the rim of his coffee mug. The steam curled upward, fading into the morning sunlight streaming through the window. He hadn't slept. His mind raced all night, running through scenarios of how the confrontation would unfold. What would she say? Would she deny it? Or would she come clean? A small part of him still hoped for an explanation that might soften the blow, though he knew better. The sound of the garage door opening jolted him from his thoughts. Melissa was home. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she walked into the kitchen, her hair slightly tousled, her cheeks flushed. Ethan noticed the faint scent of her perfume, the one she used sparingly, only for special occasions. "Morning," Melissa said, her voice light, as though nothing was amiss. She placed her bag on the counter, her smile warm but distracted. "Sorry I got in so late. The meeting ran over and Jacob insisted on a few rounds with the team afterward. Ethan's jaw tightened. He set his mug down deliberately, the sound reverberating between them. "We need to talk," he said, his tone steady but firm. Ethan gestured toward the dining room. "Sit." She hesitated for a moment, searching his face, then complied. Ethan followed her, his movements deliberate, carrying a manila envelope under his arm. He placed it on the table between them and sat down, his sharp blue eyes locking onto hers. "Melissa," he began, his voice calm but with an undertone of gravity. "I know about Jacob. I might just plan this trip with you to test my fingers in a way." For a fleeting second, her composure faltered. A flicker of panic flashed in her eyes. She quickly recovered, plastering on an incredulous expression. "What are you talking about?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he opened the envelope and slid the photographs and reports across the table. Melissa stared at them, her face draining of color. She didn't touch the papers, didn't move at all. "I hired a private investigator," Ethan said, his voice even. "These are from the last 3 weeks, but we both know this didn't start recently, did it?" Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the photographs, flipping through them. She stopped at one. A picture of her and Jacob outside a hotel, their bodies too close, their smiles too intimate. "You followed me?" she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "You spied on me?" Ethan leaned forward, his gaze unyielding. "Don't turn this on me. You lied to me. You lied to my face night after night, and now you're shocked that I wanted to know the truth?" Melissa's mouth opened and closed, struggling for a response. It's not what it looks like," she said weakly. Ethan's laugh was bitter. "Really? Then explain. Make me understand why my wife is sneaking around with her ex-boyfriend, why she's been lying about her whereabouts, why she's been gaslighting me for months." "I didn't—" Melissa started but then stopped herself. She let out a shaky breath, and tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Jacob. He's always been a part of me, Ethan. When we reconnected, it was like something I thought I'd buried came back to life." Ethan's stomach churned, but he kept his expression neutral. "And what about us? What about our life? Did that mean anything to you?" Melissa's tears spilled over. "Of course it did. Of course it does. I love you, Ethan, but Jacob, I don't know. It's complicated." Ethan stared at her, his chest tightening. "Complicated?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You think it's complicated for you? What about me, Melissa? What about the person you betrayed?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. "It just happened. I never planned for this." Ethan's fists clenched on the table. "You never planned for it, but you let it continue. You made choices, Melissa. Choices to lie, to betray, to destroy everything we'd built together." Melissa buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. Ethan sat back, his heart pounding, a mixture of anger and anguish consuming him. He had imagined this confrontation so many times. But now, faced with her tears and fractured words, he felt no satisfaction. The truth had been laid bare, but it brought no relief. Only a cold, empty space where his trust had once been. "I need time," Ethan said finally, standing. "I need to think about what comes next." Melissa looked up, her tear-streaked face pleading. "Please, Ethan, please don't give up on us." He turned away, unable to look at her any longer. "I didn't give up, Melissa. You did." Ethan spent the next few days in a haze, shrouded in a quiet storm of thoughts and emotions. He had moved into the guest room, not to create distance as much as to gain clarity. The evidence of Melissa's betrayal lay in the manila envelope on his desk, untouched since their confrontation. It felt like the ghost of their marriage haunted every corner of the house, reminding him of what he had lost, or what had never truly been his to begin with. Melissa tried to talk to him several times, but Ethan maintained a wall of cold civility. He wasn't ready to hear more apologies or justifications. He wasn't ready to forgive, and he wasn't even sure he wanted to. His sister Claire called every night to check on him. She had offered to come over and help him sort through his feelings, but Ethan declined. This was a battle he had to face alone. One morning he woke to the sound of laughter drifting through the open window. Melissa was outside with their neighbor Patricia, her voice light and carefree. Ethan glanced out and saw her gesturing animatedly, the sunlight catching the golden strands in her hair. She looked like the woman he fell in love with, bright, charming, effortless. The sight filled him with a bitterness he couldn't shake. How could she appear so unaffected while he felt like he was drowning? He decided it was time to take action, not out of vengeance, but for his own sense of closure. If Melissa wanted to pretend everything was fine, he would ensure she faced the consequences of her choices. Ethan began gathering the fragments of Melissa's deception, turning his home office into a war room. The photos, texts, and receipts from the investigator were just the start. He meticulously went through their shared bank statements and phone bills, noting every inconsistency. He found charges for dinners and gifts that Melissa had never mentioned. He discovered phone calls at odd hours and recurring payments to a luxury hotel downtown. He didn't stop there. He combed through their shared social media accounts, looking for clues that might tie her behavior to specific dates. Melissa had always been careful about curating their online presence, but Ethan had learned from experience that even the smallest detail could be telling. In a photo from 6 months ago, Melissa had tagged a group of friends at a restaurant, but Jacob wasn't listed among them. Yet, a closer look revealed his reflection in the window behind her. Ethan wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly. Maybe a way to make sense of the chaos. Or maybe just the fuel to confront Melissa one last time with irrefutable proof of her betrayal. Either way, the process was both cathartic and deeply painful. That evening, as Melissa prepared dinner in the kitchen, Ethan set his laptop on the counter. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady. Melissa turned, her hands trembling slightly. I thought we already did." "No," Ethan said, opening a folder on his screen. "You talked. I listened. Now, it's my turn." He clicked through the files he had assembled. Melissa's face paled as images of her and Jacob filled the screen. Some were from the investigator, others from her own posts. Ethan didn't stop there. He opened spreadsheets detailing the financial inconsistencies, highlighted messages that contradicted her alibis, and even played an audio recording the investigator had captured. A snippet of her and Jacob discussing their plans to meet at a hotel. "You've been lying to me for over a year," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You didn't just cheat, Melissa. You built a life with him while pretending to build one with me." Melissa's eyes brimmed with tears, but she didn't look away. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake." He shook his head. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was calculated. You hid this from me every step of the way. And for what? What was I to you? A safety net? A backup plan?" "No," Melissa cried. "It wasn't like that. I love you, Ethan. I got lost." Ethan's laugh was humorless. "Got lost? You seemed pretty clear-headed when you booked hotel rooms and planned trips. Spare me the excuses, Melissa." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this," she pleaded. "I'll cut him out of my life completely. I'll go to counseling. Just, please, don't give up on us." Ethan studied her, his sharp blue eyes piercing through her desperation. "Do you even understand what you've done? This isn't just about the affair, Melissa. It's about trust, respect, and everything we built together. How do you come back from destroying something like that?" Melissa opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she sank into a chair, her head in her hands, sobbing softly. Ethan watched her, a mixture of anger and sorrow twisting in his chest. He had loved her once, with everything he had, but now all he could see were the cracks in the foundation of their marriage. "I don't know if there's a way forward for us," he said quietly. "Right now, I need time, I need space, and you need to figure out what you want, because whatever this was, it's over." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Melissa alone with her tears and the damning evidence of her betrayal. Upstairs, in the solitude of his guest room, Ethan felt the weight of finality settle over him. There was no going back. The life he thought he had was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of what Melissa had done. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of clarity. Ethan's request for space created an uneasy truce in the household. Melissa no longer tried to approach him with tearful pleas or empty reassurances. Instead, she moved through the days like a shadow, her usual confidence and charm replaced with a nervous energy. Ethan noticed everything: the way she avoided eye contact, the cautious way she spoke to him when they had to exchange words, the heavy silences that filled the house. For Ethan, the days were long and restless. He threw himself into his work, taking on extra projects and spending hours at the office just to avoid the suffocating atmosphere at home. Nights were worse. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of Melissa and Jacob, by the sound of her voice whispering lies, and by the images of her betrayal that replayed in his mind like a relentless film reel. Claire visited him one evening, her concern etched deeply in her face. She found him in the study, surrounded by files and papers that had nothing to do with work. Ethan had taken to documenting everything, every inconsistency in Melissa's story, every detail of her deception. "Eee," Claire said softly, sitting across from him, "this isn't healthy." Ethan didn't look up from the papers. "I need to know everything. I can't just let this go." "Ooh," she asked gently. "What are you hoping to find? Proof of something worse, or is it closure?" Ethan paused, his pen hovering over the notebook. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I just need to understand why." Claire sighed. "Sometimes you don't get the why. Sometimes people hurt us for reasons that have nothing to do with who we are or what we've done. You could have been the perfect husband, Ethan, and she might still have done this." He looked at her then, his blue eyes weary. "But I wasn't perfect. I ignored the signs. I didn't ask questions. Maybe if I had—" "Don't do that," Clara interrupted firmly. "Don't take her choices and make them your fault. She made decisions, Ethan, terrible ones. That's on her." Her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind as he lay awake that night. She was right. He had spent so much energy trying to dissect Melissa's actions that he hadn't stopped to ask himself what he truly wanted. Could he even imagine a future with her now? And if not, what was he still doing here? The next morning, Ethan found Melissa in the kitchen, her back to him as she prepared breakfast. For a moment, he saw her as she used to be, the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who made him laugh, who had shared his dreams of building a life together. But the illusion shattered as soon as she turned, her face etched with guilt and desperation. "Ethan," she began, setting down the spatula. "Ethan, can we talk? Please?" Melissa hesitated, twisting her hands nervously. "I've been thinking about everything. About what I did, about what I've done to us. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me a chance to make things right." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that?" "I'll do anything," she said earnestly. "Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I'll cut Jacob out of my life completely. I'll prove to you that I still love you, that I want to fix this." "Fix this?" Ethan's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Melissa, this isn't a broken chair you can glue back together. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices, calculated, deliberate choices, that destroyed the foundation of our marriage. How do you fix that?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I'm willing to try. Please, Ethan. We can't just throw away everything we've built together." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. There was a time when he would have done anything to preserve their life together, but now all he felt was exhaustion. "You don't get it," he said finally. "You already threw it away. When you chose him over me, when you lied to my face, you decided our marriage wasn't worth protecting. So why should I fight for something you didn't value?" Melissa's sobs broke the silence, but Ethan didn't move to comfort her. Instead, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with her tears. Later that evening, Ethan found himself back in his study, staring at the manila envelope that had upended his life. He thought about the version of himself who had loved Melissa so deeply, who had believed in her unconditionally. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, more guarded, and painfully aware of how fragile trust could be. He picked up his phone and dialed Claire. "I think I'm ready," he said when she answered. "For what?" There was a pause on the other end. Then Claire said, "I'm here for you, whatever you need." Ethan exhaled, a strange mixture of relief and sorrow filling him. The road ahead would be messy and painful, but for the first time, he felt like he could see a way forward, and this time, it wouldn't be on Melissa's terms. It would be on his. The community center was packed for the annual charity gala, a cornerstone event in their suburban neighborhood. The air buzzed with polite laughter, the clinking of wine glasses, and the soft murmur of conversations weaving through the crowd. Ethan stood near the back, his sharp blue eyes scanning the room. This would be the stage for the culmination of weeks of planning, the moment where he reclaimed his narrative and left no room for misunderstanding. Melissa was at the center of it all, her dazzling smile lighting up the space as she chatted with friends and neighbors. She wore a deep red dress, one Ethan had always loved, and for a fleeting moment, he felt the pang of what once was. But that feeling passed quickly, replaced by the cold clarity that had fueled his decision. Ethan had arrived early, his prepared materials discreetly handed to the event's organizer. He wasn't looking to create a spectacle, but instead wanted a decisive moment of truth, one that Melissa couldn't twist, deny, or dismiss. As the evening program began, Ethan took a seat near the front. The host, a charismatic local businesswoman, stepped up to the podium and began the usual announcements. Ethan barely listened as she thanked sponsors and introduced speakers, his focus instead on the envelope she carried with her, a slim, unassuming package that contained everything he needed to expose the truth. When it was Melissa's turn to speak, she ascended the stage with the ease of someone who thrived in the spotlight. She had volunteered to chair the gala this year, eager to maintain her reputation as the perfect wife, the gracious hostess. Ethan watched as she launched into a practiced speech, thanking donors and emphasizing the importance of community. Before we continue, the host interjected as Melissa finished, we have a brief acknowledgement prepared by Ethan Carter. He's been a long-standing supporter of our community initiatives, and tonight he wanted to share something very special. Melissa froze, her smile faltering as Ethan stood and walked toward the stage. He didn't meet her gaze as he passed her, taking the microphone with quiet confidence. "Thank you, everyone," Ethan began, his voice steady. "I won't take up too much of your time. Tonight, I'd like to talk about honesty, how it strengthens relationships, builds trust, and forms the backbone of any community." His words hung in the air, deliberate and pointed. Ethan glanced at Melissa, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the podium. "Over the past few months," he continued, "I've learned the hard way what happens when honesty is replaced by deceit, when the person you trust most in the world chooses lies over love." Gasps rippled through the audience as the host handed out envelopes to the tables. Inside were copies of the evidence Ethan had painstakingly collected: photographs, text messages, and a brief letter explaining the situation. Ethan didn't embellish or sensationalize. The facts spoke for themselves. Melissa's composure shattered as the room erupted in murmurs. People whispered to one another, some stealing glances at her, others openly staring. Ethan stepped back from the microphone, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. Later, as the gala dissolved into chaos, Ethan slipped out the side door. He didn't need to stay and witness the fallout. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about taking control of his life, ending a chapter on his own terms. Outside, the cool night air greeted him, crisp and grounding. Claire waited for him by his car, her arms crossed protectively against the cold. "Well?" she asked. "It's done," Ethan said simply. She studied him for a moment, searching his face for any sign of regret or doubt. "And how do you feel?" Ethan leaned against the car, exhaling deeply, relieved. "Sad, free." Claire nodded, understanding. "What's next?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "But it's not this. I can't stay in that house, in that life. It's time to move on." The drive home was quiet. Ethan's thoughts were scattered, flickering between the events of the evening and the uncertain road ahead. When he arrived, Melissa was sitting in the living room, her tear-streaked face turned toward the door, as if she had been waiting for him. "Ethan," she started, her voice trembling, "I can't believe you did that to me, to us." He stood in the doorway, his gaze steady. "I didn't do this, Melissa. You did. You made the choices that led us here." She opened her mouth to argue but then closed it again, defeated. Ethan stepped forward, his voice soft but resolute. "I'll be staying with Claire for a while. I'll send someone for my things." Melissa broke down, sobbing into her hands. "Please, Ethan, we can still fix this." He didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out the door, the weight of the past lifting with each step. As he drove away, the future stretched before him, unmapped, uncertain, but undeniably his.